come along. Asfaw used to be the general secretary, the main leader of the churches down in the Garagi area. He graciously came down. He's studying online for his master's degree, but he came up to help us. We purchased plywood, boards, urethane, and other items. The materials in most of our luggage were loaded onto a truck and carried down to Emdeber. On Saturday, the 19th, we loaded into a van and headed down to Emdeber, shopping along the way. If, by the way, there's any pictures you want to see, just tell Oliver to back up, and he gladly will. So the vehicles carry people. And the vehicles carry people and other travelers. So we arrived at our -1-star hotel. Now this hotel doesn't have running water, doesn't have continual electricity, doesn't have flush toilets or any of the commodities that you would really hope for, but it is a hotel. And that evening, when we first got down there, we had the first of our many roast sheep dinners. Basically, they whack up a sheep, cook it up into a pan right in front of you, and then serve it. It's nice to be back in the land of beef. The Brants lived in what is referred to as the teacher's house, where we would gather for our meals each day and where our laundry was done twice a week. They had a lady come in and would hand wash our clothes and hang it up. That Sunday, we went to the Emdeber Kalihiwat Church where Howard preached. Howard preached pretty much every Sunday that we were there at another church, one church or another. This is also the same location as where the original Bible school was. This is where Corey and I and Daniel first were, and where we did our first construction. This is the school where, when Howard kept on asking us to come over to Ethiopia, we would always say, why? And then when they said that they were using borrowed benches and they were working on other benches, we said, okay, we have a reason to go. So we went, and that's the site of the original Bible school. The next day, our work began. We arrived at the Bible school, and shortly we saw that the bench and table frames arrived, which we found in ragged condition and not exactly as per the drawn plans. They had to be repetitively sent back to be altered and made adequate for use. We were building tabletops on these frames and seats for the benches. We made computer tables and others. And so these metal frames were what we were using for a little more durable long-term use. But the welders, they went with the low bid. For those that do government contracts and all, remember, low bid gives you the quality of welding that you saw in the pictures. So we began our work, breaking down the plywood into tabletops, cabinets, bookcases, and boards, and the boards into bench tops. A lot of plywood just cut down to make surfaces. Now, here's to show a little bit of daily life. pounding of the buna. Buna, by the way, is coffee. So the ladies would go out each day and pound coffee, which they would then brew up, and we would have it in the morning, in the afternoon, and several other times. And the metal frames, after we sent them back, came back again for inspection, and once again, rejection. As you can tell, the quality of the welding was marginal at best, and we found out that if we gave them instructions one item at a time and sent the things away, they might come back sort of like we asked for. So it was a bit brutal. And in fact, we actually didn't get all of the stuff fixed by the time we left 6 weeks later. Our first completed project was originally a 6-door cabinet that once we got there, they immediately said, how about 8 doors? Well, we have to bring a lot of the hardware from the States because what is available in Ethiopia is cheap and marginal at best, so we bring hinges and things like that. So this is the cabinet. It actually has only 7 working doors. The other one is made, but we didn't have the extra hinges because we weren't planning on it. While we were doing the construction, others were ministering in other ways. Carla was teaching a computer class. She's worked for Intel for over 30 years, and so they asked her to teach a computer class to the English students. Then we have Howard and Joanne, who always are teaching while they're over there. Now we segue back into daily routine, and that is the way our water arrived at the hotel. The donkeys would come in with their jerry cans sitting on there, and then we would empty them out into the buckets and barrels we had in our room because the people bringing in the water wanted their jerry cans back immediately. So this was a fairly routine thing to empty the water buckets when we got back. Bruce and Carla, the 2 folks from down in Oregon. Bruce is a superb carpenter. It was nice being just able to hold the other end of a piece of wood and have him direct everything that needed to be done, because that's the style of carpenter I am. Carla and Bruce had brought along a hot water pot, one of the little coffee pot types, and once we changed out the plug to make it actually work over there, we got to be able to heat up a coffee pot, and our showers became much more comfortable other than cold water. So I would get it first, I would heat the water, dump it, I'd run the pot over to Oliver's room. Oliver had his own room. And then when Oliver was done, he'd run it back over to Bruce and Carla's. So the school, they likes to celebrate the people coming over, to give them welcome and to send them off. Well, they wanted to celebrate Bruce and Carla coming. Actually, this was supposed to be the departure feast, because they like to do a feast. There's usually sacrificial lambs, literally sacrificial lambs, coming in, and they would become dinner. But since the week that Bruce and Carla were leaving is the Orthodox Church's meat fast, and they don't eat meat, and our driver, Bedlu, was Orthodox, they were kind enough to do it the week we arrived. So we had a sheep feast when we arrived. 3 days later, we had another sheep feast. And at this feast, we had it in the evening, and the school has an evening class for those that work during the day. And one of the participants in this, the Bible school that functions at night, was the mayor of the town. So that is a good draw and a good witness to the town around. Part of our time there, it was listening to Muslim chants at 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning, 6 in the morning, and throughout the day. And not only that, the Orthodox church there, they also have their dueling speakers chanting throughout the day. And since this is the precursor to Easter, they celebrated and they chanted oh so often. So onward with our construction now of the bookcases, of which we made 7. Our helper, Ababe, volunteered each day. So we had the shelves and then construction. These are fancy bookcases with dadoed notches for the shelves and for the back. And then as we progressed, we actually completed these and carried them 3 floors up. Yes, and then we put them in place. So, that's us. But all work and no play makes cranky folks. So we took out the highly energetic Oli photo of playing ping pong, so we just have a tame one there. Ping pong was a big draw through any break for the students, and that was one of the things that you all helped fund when we went over, was a lot of sports equipment, among ping pong nets and paddles and things like that. We got there and the ping pong balls were so used that they hardly bounced anymore. They were virtually out of gas. On that Saturday, we decided to head up to Moicha. Moicha is the area where Asphal, the previous general secretary, and Mikius, the current director for spiritual ministries. Mikius was also a student the first time we were over there. We went up there to Moicha, where they're from. The first stop was at an Orthodox church that had not been dedicated, so we had the opportunity to be able to walk through it. If you notice the quality scaffolding, again, OSHA does not seem to function very well in Ethiopia. Okay, the next place we stopped was at the Yoka, or the Judicial Center. And yes, that tree is the Judicial Center. They actually deal with court and any arbitration or anything that goes on there right in front of the tree, and what goes there stands, just like in a court of law. Then, our next stop after that is the place where we're in a place where witch doctors actually still practice and they offer sacrifices. That is Asphal, and no, he's not doing any sacrifices. And then right before Moicha, they had a waterfall. Well, there wasn't any water currently at the waterfall. And after much convincing, we stopped Ole from wanting to jump. And then right by there's a stream, or where the river is, they actually have a bridge. And the gentleman in the red is Bedlu. Bedlu was, again, our driver, and he's Orthodox. And we spent, Howard and Joanne and the other church leaders spent a great deal of time working on introducing him to Christ. When we had left, he still hadn't accepted. However, he was realizing how the Orthodox Church was just ritual, and how the crazy evangelicals who he thought we were going to be were actually studied the Bible and taught it and did not do the crazy things that he had been led to believe. Then on to the Moicha Church, where Daniel, Corey, and I first went on our first visit. And that was the place where I first gave my testimony over there, and where they still pray for me. And then right beside it is their new church, which they've tried to meet in there, but it echoes like an echo chamber. We gave them, Bruce knows a fantastic amount about construction and everything else, and gave them several hints on how to dampen the echo on the noise there. Short walk away, we stopped at Asfau's parents' house. This one here is one of their older houses, and if you notice, the roof is in a little bit of need of repair. The grass that they use, because of things that have gone on, is in scarce supply. So a lot of the traditional houses are going out of existence. In fact, while we were there, this particular house, not while we were standing there, but a couple days later, this house was actually burned to the ground, just to make room for clearing. So that's the back part of the house. The circular house, has a wall halfway through. On the back side, which is where they cook and where the cows stay and the chickens and other things, are all back here. The front part has the traditional style chairs, and this is where everybody sleeps. There's actually a fire pit where they cook their buna, their coffee, and other things. That shows a little bit of the structural support for the roof. These houses are fairly dark inside, and once your eyes will get used to it, but with the smoke and everything, it helps preserve the grass and helps keep the bugs from working their way through the grass roofs and onto you. So behind the house, we saw Enset. Enset is a staple that everybody grows in their own gardens. We saw the life cycle of this, starting off with little plants, which they move pretty much once a year, so they can fortify the soil, and eventually to the larger plants by where Asphalt is standing beside, which are about 10 or 12 years old. Now this Enset is a plant where they use the pithy center, and they scrape it and they make a bread called kocho. The first time I went, it was kocho. You know, I could leave it on the side, but now it's fine. I guess familiarity changes your palate. Then after we were there, Asphalt wanted a short lesson on pruning. So while we were there, we did a little bit of pruning. We revisited his house. These are his parents' trees, and they get apple trees from the government at a fairly cheap price. And they seem to like them, but nobody knows how to take care of them. So I spent a fair amount of time traveling from house to house, pruning apple trees. So this is stage one at Asphalt's parents' house. His father was standing just out of screen there And he had this look of consternation as his trees were whacked down. Then afterwards, we had a meal there. Everywhere we went, we'd always have a meal or kolo, which is a grain that we had at coffee breaks or something, and always coffee. And some of us really enjoyed this time, and some of us didn't quite. And you do not realize how much torture that Oli went to when he was buying gifts, and he had this list of people that wanted coffee, and he knew nothing about coffee. So we had to help him on whole bean, dark roast, and all these other things because we used his uncle as the prime candidate. Then that Saturday, Howard preached in the nearby town of Arakat. Actually, it was an hour and a half away. And while Howard preached, or actually not while he preached, but before he preached, I gave my testimony up in Arakat. And after we were there, the church treated us to a lunch of kitfo. Kitfo is chopped meat. I originally thought it was always chopped beef, and it's normally for Ethiopians served raw. Howard and Joanne, they always have us eat it cooked. But it's chopped meat, most often beef, but we found out that it was also sheep. And sheep they always cook, but beef they like raw. And they pour a spiced butter all over it so it swims, and it's really good. And at this particular dinner, Oli and I almost crossed spoons in fighting for the bottom of the bowl. And always coffee. And that cup of coffee right there, you can see it's floating with butter because it's normally served a lot of times with salt, and on special occasions, butter. And so you get coffee with a butter slick. And then this is the one time that I actually saw Oli. Yes, Oli likes coffee. We bought some meat in preparation for everybody leaving that evening or the next week. So there was some food preparation going on. That is the style of axe that they use, a little bit different than what we had, and what Oli was doing was whacking up the bones so we could make stock for soup. Then that Wednesday, we went to a restaurant almost 2 hours away. If you looked on a map, it was only actually just a hop, skip, and a valley away, but it took us 2 hours to get there. And we went with the church leaders, Mesfin and Mikias, and we'll see them in a while, and their wives and their respective sons. In the culture there, it's not very common for the wives to come along or to be part of any of these gatherings. If you'll notice on some of the feasts that we have, it'll be all men. And so this was a special time that we actually got to meet somebody in their family and have two small, 1.5 8-year-old boys run around the restaurant. And again, this was a couple hours away because it was a restaurant that actually served meat during the Lenten holiday. So, onward to construction. And once again, we made toilet seats. Squatty potties, they can only go so far, and then the couple of pedestal toilets that they actually had, again, think cheap Chinese materials that fall apart. So we were building toilet seats so that any that should choose to use them had them. One of the things was, if they're trying to invite other speakers from other countries, it's nice to have a place to sit. And so the frames of these things came again and were rejected and onward. So they would bring them in and we would look at them, we would point out, we would send them away. And again, there's a lot of miming because they don't understand English and I don't speak Amharic. And Oli's a big conversationalist. So we would get them, they would come in here on a cart, and we would send them away, or they would start working on them right there with their welder. And then we wanted to do something nice for the kitchen ladies. These are the ladies that they sit there and they cook. And they actually cook over wood in one kitchen, and the other kitchen, when they have electricity and when the stove is working, they have an electric type. Right now, I think they're down to one burner, and then they have something to make their injera, which is a flat, you could call it a bread, but it's very flexible, and they use it for eating pretty much everything. So we went over there and tried to talk to them about their cutting board, right? They had a board, it was worn literally through the bottom, and it was prompted, and somebody here took their cutting board after we gave them the new ones so that they would not resort to what they had. So we made cutting boards, and this is the built to order cutting board for the lady who then said it's 2 inches too high. So we took it away, we did a couple of modifications, and then we made some other chopping blocks. So we went into production mode. We had small cutting boards, and then we had large ones for when they do kitfo for a crowd, and you've got 2 knives flailing away on multiple tables. Yes, they like them. Later on, we made little benches for them to sit on, so they moved up in quality and quantity. A couple of afternoons each week, Howard had them do plays, the students. And these plays were based on stories in the Bible, where they demonstrated the story, and they were graded on how accurately and completely they attended to Scripture. One play was Paul's conversion. So we had, people being struck blind and being led around and things like that. And when you don't understand Amharic, but you can still follow the play, it was great. Then there was one about Paul and Barnabas, where they were going to sacrifice to them, and they brought in a goat. They led a goat. You could hear it coming up the stairs. They did not actually sacrifice the goat while we were there. It was led back down the street later on. But they brought in props to make sure that they got a good grade in Howard's class. And the purpose of this teaching method was to ingrain the stories into the students, as well as so they could take them back to their local churches and be able to teach the youth there or others. I thought it was fairly effective, and they did quite a good job dressing up. One young lady drew a beard on herself and stuff like that, and she was one young lady student. She was one that always dressed very nicely, and all of a sudden I looked over and there she was with a beard drawn on her. And we always have to revert back to our Buna because that was a constant theme. And then back to the routine of urethaning for Oli. Oli was outside quite a bit using the urethane brush, giving coatings to all the surfaces that we had. The toilet seats, for their intended use, they've got numerous coats and they had to be allowed to dry in between and sanded and etc. And then here we are, the construction crew. That's Bruce and yours truly and your others truly. That's going back to work after lunch one day. Where the red gate was where the teacher's house was. And so we would walk there for lunch. And then the projects and completions continued. Oh, another daily life. Teachers and ongoing ping pong. The gentleman in the center is Mesfin. He is now the general secretary, and he is the main person in charge. The person on the right is Tomuskin. Tomuskin speaks fairly good English, and he was the pastor in Gubre, and now he is one of the teachers there at the school. The other younger is what's his name?
Kibru.
Oh, Kibru. Excuse me. Kibru teaches the evening school and the extension school. And he's actually a good addition in there. All the leadership there seem to be getting along quite well, both of the school and of the church. So we finished the toilet seats. And we continued on with the construction. There were computer tables, the ones in the back, where there were dividers in between. And there were desks, and there were tables, and there's Oli out urethaning. There were a lot of surfaces, and Oli was out there quite a bit. He would get bored, and then he would go and play ping pong. And then he would come back and urethane some more. The staff and the students and the other adults, they all appreciated Oli being there. He was a big contribution to what we did and a good addition. And that's Howard, for those of you that don't know him, and Oliver. We got pineapple every once in a while, and Oliver was learning how to prepare pineapple. After this, Bruce and Carla went home, and the Brants went to Addis for a conference and to pick up our next guests, Nelson and Shobana Dinakaran, and they're from India. So we flew solo for a week. Oliver and I did. We went to church up the road with Asphalt as an interpreter. So here's somebody whose English is not his primary language, and we were in a church, and Asphalt translated for us the best he could. We could follow along in the Bible and go to church there. Following that, we went to Asphalt's parents' house again, traveling 3 persons and a driver in a Bajaj. Now, a Bajaj, you'll see a picture of a Bajaj in a little bit. It's It's a motorcycle with a little cab behind it. And normally you would probably put 1 or 2 people in the back and then you have a driver. Well, we were 3 across and it worked out fine. And then we turned asphalt into a pruning machine. And those nice full trees are now a little bit thinner, ready to spread out and ready to grow a little better apples. Their apples were about this big. So, and they thought if they had a lot of apples on there, that was a good thing. So you'd have these sticks going straight up and a whole bunch of little apples. So we were in the education time. That week, Mesfin, the new general secretary, brought Kitfo over because they all knew that both Oliver and I liked Kitfo. And it wasn't me, but they all took a liking to Oli, and they brought Kitfo over, even when the electricity was out. And so we had Kitfo by a lantern light at the teacher's house one evening. And one of the guards there that is at the school came over and ate as well. 2 days later, we had Kitfo again at Mesfin's house. We continued working on the construction projects, including the repair of a water tank where a man named Getachew came from Addis to help out. Getachew helped out at the SIM guest house before, and Getachew took the lead on this. This water tank, they had rolled it over originally and it had pressed a rock through the bottom, and so it was leaking. Water is a commodity there, so we tipped it over, we cleaned it up, and immediately after we did that, they shoved a bunch of granite blocks underneath to take that nice smooth bottom and push it up. We explained later that was probably not the best thing for them to do. So during this week, the computer class that Carla had taught, I taught for the Amharic students. There was an awful lot of miming going on as I tried to show them how to do formatting and saving files and finding files and things like that. We had a good time, and there was a significant language barrier. And then again, we have, for everybody that knows Oli, we had one of our local blacksmiths there. If you can tell, there's a hammerhead sitting for his anvil, and he's beating out a gouge for somebody's work at their house. Nelson and Shobana arrived, and they both taught courses. They also took a liking to Oli, and Oliver was Shobana's star student in her class. They gave us hats. And these hats are from a tribe in the northern part of India. And every time I delivered the water pot over to Oliver's room, he was wearing this hat. It brought a smile to Shobana's face. Oliver attended, during this last part, he attended the inductive Bible study methods course that Shobana taught. And we have a picture of the class there. During this time, Mikius wanted some pruning done back up there in Moicha. So, in the middle of the week, I jumped onto the back of Mikius's motorcycle. These things are held together literally with electrical tape and duct tape. Partway up, we got a flat. So he called for a repair, and he sent me on the way in a Bajaj. I got out at Moicha, and 2 men came running up. One of them saying, "Mikius' father." I had no idea who these people were, but he mentioned Mikius, so I followed them over the hill and over the dale to a house, and I started pruning. After a while, Mikius showed up with the loaner motorcycle. There were a lot of trees, so I was there for a while, and it started to rain hard. So we went inside, and I passed by the cow and through the house and into the main room where we sat there and had conversation for a while. The rain slowed, so I went out and I finished the trees. Then Mickey said, "There's some more trees over here." And so I went up and down the hills and over to another house, and I started pruning there. And that became a theme. Wherever I got, Mickey got a hold of me, I would go to a house and I'd prune, and then I'd get invited to another house to prune, et cetera, et cetera. But then all of a sudden Mickey said, "I need to get down to town in an hour and preach." So we jumped onto the back of his motorcycle, the borrowed one, which didn't start, so we had to push start it. And we got a little ways and then it rained. And so we pulled in and jumped into shelter, and then we jumped back on, and it was red clay dirt, and the roads were slick, and we're going down, and Mickey is really nervous with me on the back. We found another Bajaj. Remember the Bajaj? Yes. Okay, I got into a Bajaj. There was one other person in there and the driver. And then we went a little farther, and then there was another person in there with a bag. So there were 3 of us in a Bajaj. One got out, one got in. Then we came up, and there were 3 old ladies and a mound of bags. And I looked, and I could not figure this out. But we stopped, and the bags started getting hauled into the Bajaj. One bag after another bag, and there was this bucket, and it got put in there, and I'm looking and trying to figure it out. I was escorted into the front, and then only one of the older ladies got in. So the other 2 just sat there and cried as we left. So with the driver, we were now 5. 5 people in a Bajaj. Large bags all around in buckets. And then we were passing by people trying to flag us down. They were carrying big bags of potatoes and onions. And luckily, the driver said no. However, shortly after that, 2 others ran up and jumped inside. So now there were 7 of us in this Bajaj. There was me, the driver, and another person in the front, and 4 people, numerous large bags in a bucket, all in the back. And we tootled on down the road, all the way back to Emdeber. Now, we got to Emdeber fairly late. However, they had not eaten, so we sat there for quite a while and back at the teacher's house, and we processed some sheep, and we went to bed late that evening. That Saturday, we got a call from Mickey's inviting Oliver and I to go hike up Mount Mugo. Mount Mugo is a couple of hours away with a good vehicle. So we all leaped at the opportunity and went to the bus station where we sat for a couple of hours. This is market day. So everybody is trying to come in and go out, and you have to flag and figure out which bus or van is going. Eventually, after a couple of hours, we found a bus that they procured us a couple of seats on, and it was a bus. We tootled on down the way, and then we got into a crowded van, and we tootled on the way farther, and then we jumped into a Bajaj, and we kept on going all the way up through the town of Mugo up to Mount Mugo, which we got out, and we had a refreshing hike up to the top of Mount Mugo. Now, they were all warning us, why don't we have jackets and anything like that? And we were in T-shirts, and it was because this is actually comfortable now. And so we hiked up to the top of Mount Mugo, which is almost 11,000 feet. And at the top, there is a mosque, and that's an old mosque. And then there's a cave that the Italians built while the communists were there during the Dirge. This is where, when Howard and Joanne eventually left, Howard was arrested, and they left Ethiopia for quite a number of years. So then we headed down, and we ran into some children playing tetherball with their feet with the made-up bag, and Mickey has jumped in for a while and couldn't get Oliver to quite jump in, but he was there. And then we went down to the road, and like all roads in Ethiopia, the local traffic just trotted on by. And then we had no real transportation, so we just started walking down the road toward the town of Mugo, a while away. And while we were walking down, that's a typical view of the countryside once you're up in the hills, and the houses and the terraces there. And while we were there, we flagged down a van, and we got in. Well, just like the Bajaj, you can really pack a van. We were 6 across in one row, and this van, it was sort of like some of the family vans around here. Anyway, there were well over 20 people in this van tootling down the road, with a couple of conspicuous people with a little paler skin in the van. So, but good times were there, and they actually sometimes sing in these vans, as I found out on a couple of trips. So we went back to the school, where they were preparing for a feast for the leaders that night and for a conference the next day. So we had another sacrificial, which then became one version of lamb chops. And this is how a normal sheep dinner went. They built a little fire out of eucalyptus wood, throw a pan on top, throw chips and chunks of sheep in there, and stir them around with a little salt, and the next thing you know, pops out on a plate, which is fairly tasty until you've had sheep numerous times, and it was getting a bit old by that time. But that was a sheep dinner. They actually like to sit there and gnaw on the bones, and then they get a knife. And you'll find some of the knives sitting over there on Oli's display, where they actually sit there and carve. And they say to cut down, not cut up, lest you, because they're grabbing these in their teeth, and some of us like to keep the tips of our nose. And then the next day, there was a conference with a lot of the leaders of the churches from many areas around, and they gave a lot of honors and gifting to the various leaders. There was Howard receiving one of the shawls. Everybody got something. And then there's some pictures of, that's Asphal giving a speech. And part of his speech was in the transition of the leadership from old white-haired men to younger men to even younger men, talking about the transition of the leadership over to Mesfin. This picture was actually the leader before Asphal, behind the selfie stick camera, Asphal and Mesfin, talking about the progression of the leadership as the general secretary. Asphal was in that position for about 18 years. And then we had the finishing of our projects. We finished bookshelves around a column, a newspaper stand, and teachers' desks, several of them. They really liked to get these desks because they quickly move things out. And then computer tables, and benches. Every time we've been over there, we build benches. I build the benches to go with something specifically, yet as soon as I deliver them, they get scattered to the four winds. So the tables we built, I built benches for them. The computer tables, I built benches for them to match, and yet they just keep on getting scattered around. So then we went and we did a day of shopping at the local market. Now, the kitchen ladies, we'll stay here for a second. Kitchen ladies wanted these shelves, and I was trying to talk to them about orientation and size and stuff, and they said height. This is how high we want it. This is how high, and that was their focus. So we just kind of built shelves, and we made them that height. And then I put so many hanging screws in there to hang utensils. And so later on, these things were loaded up with pots and pans. They were a big hit. So the chopping blocks and the shelves, they were probably the most well-received things that there were. Because the kitchen ladies, they're just kind of off to the side. They're doing all the work, so everybody has something to eat during lunch and for breakfast and stuff like that. We just thought it would be nice if we did something just for them. So as we moved on, we had a shopping day in the local market. There's a lady in Garagi, they sell dishes that are usually dark, the coffee pots and the dishes for the vegetables and kitfo and things like that. That's a typical Garagi type dishes. Then the rest of the market as you wander around, and you can find 50 different places where you can buy tomatoes and avocados and onions for sale. And by the way, Oli, I found out he doesn't like tomatoes or avocados or coleslaw so we found out that some people like meat and potatoes. Which is what I fixed for Oli when Howard and Joanne were in Addis. Is every night I would fix meat and potatoes or rice, and then in the morning he would have meat with his eggs until we ran out of eggs. But meat was a precursor to everything. So then, right before we left, the day before we went back to Addis, Nelson taught at the extension school on disciples and discipleship. And after that, we had a lunch there at the local restaurant. And this is binyanyet, which is a dish served on injera. It's kind of a tangy bread type thing made out of teff, which is a grain. And this is fairly common all throughout Ethiopia. And there's lots of little things, lentils and beets and meat. Meat is something that is usually not associated with binyanyet. Other projects that we did while we were there were fixing the beds that we made the first time and the second time, just fixing up some of the rails. And one of the things that I did was make a lot more slats for the beds. Because the first time we did these, we had these beds made and we were going to put 7 slats in there, and then we found out that we were running out of wood and we needed some more. And this is when Corey was there and Daniel. And Howard it was saying it's too expensive, they can use sticks. Well, so we skip-spaced these slats on the bed. And that's sort of how they were until this time. And I went around and I found one bed with 2 slats and several others with marginal slats, and some of the rails had fallen off. So I spent a bunch of time fixing beds, adding doors to cupboards, fixing windows, and lock sets for doors and things like that. A lot of the quality of the fixtures and everything they get, as I've mentioned, are of marginal quality. And so there was a lot of repairs going on. In this time, everybody gave their testimony, including Oliver. And as he's had a big speaking part this evening, this was quite the deal. And so we got everything done. We had a good time relating with the students. We had times sharing testimonies. There was a lot of teaching going on by Howard, Joanne, Shobana, Carla, Nelson. A lot of relations with the students and visiting other churches. And so in closing, we have a picture here of Shobana and some of the leaders there in the church. And then at the end, this is one of the reasons, the main reason why we went. These are the students. They sacrificed their time, and they stay away from their families. They're there for the whole week. All of them actually make their way, this time makes their way back to their home churches to minister. But they're here in a sacrificial way, traveling great distance to learn God's word so they can go back and minister in their local churches. So that's why we were there. So now for any questions, we'll turn this over to Oliver.
Any questions?
So the cave that was on top of the mountain that the Italians built, what was the purpose of that cave?
I believe that cave was to store supplies, ammunition for the communists. I think they were up there signaling.
Yes, that was an observation place. It was the tallest area in the way, and they just stored some supplies. It's not very deep. It was hand dug in there.
Any else?
Yeah, a couple questions. You mentioned a guard at the school. You know, what's that for? And also, people are wearing long sleeves. You guys are wearing long sleeves sometimes, I observe. So how cold is it there?
The guards there are to kind of provide security for the school. They wandered, make sure things are locked, the gates are locked, and just so there's a presence there, so things don't walk. One of the guards was there the last time I was there. The long sleeves. Pretty much almost everybody there wears long sleeves. I mean, they thought it was cold when it got down to, I guess the average temperature was probably close to about 80 degrees. And anytime it got cooler, they put on jackets. If I had to wear long sleeves over there, I would have melted. So, and I was inside most of the time, creating lots of sawdust to cover myself with. Oliver, on the other hand, was outside urethaning, and each day his routine would be to start off by putting sunscreen, because Oli catches fire in the sun. Any other questions?
Oli, in as many words as possible, what's your favorite food?
It'd have to be the kid foe. Yes, I did. No, not really. The sun was shining in there, and it was very small. So. No, they were not.
Are there any other questions? Yes.
I heard you guys went on the hyena hunt. What was that like?
When we went up to go with asphalt to prune trees and stuff, we stayed there until when the hyenas should start venturing out. There was a lot of traffic on the road where we were as we were traveling out, so we never actually saw any. Oliver never saw any. I saw a couple in front of the van one time traveling down the road in the evening. But you could always tell, at least some of us that did not sleep the whole night through, where the hyenas were going through town, because you could hear the packs of dogs start off and barking, and you could say, okay, they're over here, then they're over here, and the hyenas went out. But we went hyena hunting, but they evaded us. Anything else?
Did you see any big spiders or bugs?
There were a couple in my room, but just squished them.
Yeah, the bug life was fairly small. I mean, it was prevalent, but small and not too bad, not many mosquitoes. We did, however, see a mongoose in the hotel compound. We just popped out of the van, and this mongoose was... Mongoose, it's a medium-sized, not a rodent, but they usually go after snakes. Not that I've ever seen a snake over there, but they must be after other small critters. Lots of vultures, lots of hawks. Oliver got the fun of throwing scrap bones up into the air and watching the hawks fly down and nab them out of the air. So one of the highlights for Oli was throwing food to the birds. Okay. One more, Carolee. Those were donkeys. They drive their animals down the road, whether they're sheep or they're cows or they're donkeys. We just happened to be coming down to the road and seeing them driving donkeys to the next place they needed to go. Okay. With that,
that I was needing to stall a little bit longer, so we're going to sing the first verse of number 779. We are called to be God's people, number 779. If you want to sing.
We ready to go? Yep. Girls, you want to come out here? It is my pleasure tonight to have the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to baptize my two sweet baby girls. Maybe if they ever get out here. It's bathtub, girls. Come on in. Pastor, you're boiling them, apparently. Yeah. stand right here. Good. It's okay. So this is Liberty Bible. Liberty, would you would you like to give your testimony tonight?
Yes.
Okay.
We were driving on the way to Costco, and I asked if I was a Christian. Mom said no. Me and sister both asked how to get saved. Mom told us. I told Mom that I wanted to get saved. We pulled over. I prayed, Lord, if you don't mind, will you come into my heart? Of course, the Lord said yes. I want to be baptized because I want to show everyone that I am a Christian, and that's how I want to live.
My sweet Liberty, I have 2 questions for you tonight. The first one is, do you believe that Jesus Christ is your only hope for salvation in this life?
Yes.
And is it with your own free will that you wish to be baptized tonight?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Remember how to hold?
Yeah.
Okay. So by the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, I baptize you. I know, I should have got myself a towel. I am all wet now. All right. Camille, would you like to give your testimony?
Yes. I asked Jesus to come into my heart when I was 4 years old on the side of the road. I want to get baptized today because I want to show everyone I'm a Christian and I want to follow Jesus.
Camille, sorry. I have 2 questions for you. One, do you believe that Jesus Christ is your only hope for salvation in this world?
Yes.
And with your own free will, do you wish to be baptized tonight?
Yes.
All right. In the power of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, I baptize you. I would like to, welcome 2 Christian young women into the world, Liberty and Camille Bible. And do you want me to close in prayer tonight? Okay, all right, if you'll bow with me. Dear Lord, thank you so much for letting us gather here today, and thank you so much for the blessings of my sweet Liberty and Camille as they start their journey into being wonderful, beautiful Christian young ladies, Lord. Thank you so much for letting Oli and Frank go over and help the fellow believers in Ethiopia, Lord, and please bless our church and their church and all of the believers around the world. In your Son's name, amen.